Screen just went blank. Oh, there it is. Came back. All right, let's go. Let's get it cracking. David Wilcock is a professional intuitive consultant who, since reading Richard Hoagland's Monuments on Mars in 1993, has intensively researched ufology, ancient civilizations, consciousness, science, and new paradigms on the matter of energy. He is an author of the critically acclaimed trilogy of scientific research works known as the Convergence series, which gives definitive support to the idea that a change in matter, energy, and consciousness is now occurring on Earth and throughout the solar system. Wilcock has appeared on broadcast television, lectured throughout the United States and Japan, published a variety of magazine articles, and appeared on numerous radio talk shows, and now including this one. I would like to welcome to the show Mr. David Wilcock. David, welcome to Fade to Black, man.
Well, thank you, Jimmy. It's good to be here.
Excellent having you on, and we've been, the two of us have been putting this together for a while now, but here we are, and I'm excited. It's going to be cool. It's going to be fun. So, you ready to go? You're in Boulder tonight, or you're in Denver, or?
I'm in Boulder, Colorado, shooting my existing television show, Wisdom Teachings, and we're also starting a new one called Whistleblower. It specifically focuses on all the things that insiders with high-level security clearances have told me over many years, and I realized that there's so much of that information that I have that it would be really good to just organize it and start putting it out in some sort of logical, orderly fashion, so I'm finally doing that.
How has the show been going?
Well, it's pretty amazing. We've got 65 episodes in the can so far, and that literally means 65 half hours that people can watch just by being a subscriber. The first 10 days are free.
Right.
wisdomteachings.com. But these are not just like me talking in front of a screen. These are in-depth slideshows with lots of references and lots of information. So it's kind of a strange thing, but I just have so much stuff that I've gathered over the years that's truly amazing that I actually have enough material to not only keep doing a half an hour a week, but to do two shows that are half an hour a week.
Well, we have the same issues here on this show in that, you're doing it, your material, you do your research and you tape and you continue, you think to yourself, man, okay, I've got more stuff to talk about. I need new stuff. You're always moving forward, and then suddenly you step back and you look and you go, man, we did 100 of these.
I know.
And
it's unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, with us on this show, it's the same exact thing. I don't know how many we've got in the can now, but I don't know. It's some broadcasts haven't made it online. In that, we've got like 50, 60 shows, 3 hours each.
Wow.
And you think about, just like what you just said, you've got 60, 65 shows in the can. That's a lot of material. And a year from now, you're going to look back and go, I can't believe we did all of that. And now, and this is the thing, people ask me all the time, hey, who did you have on in December? Well, I don't know. Do you remember episode 20? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's difficult to get that specific, but I've tried to construct an overall arc for both shows, like, a progression of information that's headed towards a particular destination.
I applaud you. First off, you've got a lot of stuff out there, but then again, and I was telling you before the show today, I need to be a little bit partial and impartial and objective at the same time. But you've got a lot of things going on. I mean, from all directions. And we have a lot of stuff to talk about tonight. And I say the same thing with every guest, which is, this is just a long-form conversation. We're sitting in my living room, comfortable, no agenda, nothing. There's no questions. Just wherever we start and wherever we end is what we do. All right, you ready?
Sure.
Okay. Hey, first off, I'm just going to ask you this. From one guitar player to another, what's your main axe?
I have a Martin OODB Jeff Tweedy mahogany top, all mahogany, wonderful guitar that I'm now using mostly.
That is an axe. That is an axe. That's a real guitar.
Yeah, it really. I was using a particular Taylor that's like a spruce fingerstyle guitar that doesn't even have a pick guard. It just had kind of it was a little bit loud and a little bit ringy. Like you can't even strum on that guitar because it's just so ringy that
the neighbors hear it. Yeah.
But the blend on the Martin is just incredible. It really
warm.
It almost supersedes what most guitars sound like, and it starts to sound almost like a piano.
Well, the thing is, we're boring so many people right now, but there's a certain segment of the audience is like, go, go, go. This is good. But with a Martin, because the high end doesn't seem like it's there, right?
Right.
But when you record with that, it is so balanced from top to bottom. What a microphone picks up and what your ear hears from the back of the guitar are two different things, but they record so nice.
It is incredible.
Yeah, it makes you sound better than you are.
That's absolutely true. This is one of those categories in which if you do pay more, you actually get more. And Martins are very expensive, but it's like somebody applied a compressor to your guitar, and every note that you play, the volumes are all very nice and level.
Yes.
The tone is extremely rich and complex and just amazing sounding. And so you don't even have to be very good, and it'll make you sound good.
That's right. You start thinking you're good.
Yeah. That's what happened.
A
female friend of mine came over to the house, and she had one of the cheapest Martins you can get, and I started playing it, and I was like, good Lord, this is incredible. Like 2 days later, I was at the music store and, sold off another guitar that I had just to buy this one. So,
okay, we've got
there's some geek speak for all the guitarists out there, I guess.
We've got a bunch of tweets that have come in, and one of them kind of caught my eye, and it was to ask you about you had some crazy stuff go down in 2011. Death threats or something? What?
Yeah, there's a.
Are you comfortable talking about it?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
I mean, there is a disparaging recording out there where I basically completely lose it, and I'm screaming and crying on a radio show with Carrie Cassidy because she somehow caught me 15 minutes after I had a very serious death threat from my own insider sources that basically said, if you don't do something within 24 hours, people are going to be coming to your house and they're going to torture you for a very long time before they kill you. And I felt like the threat was so real, and I was so terrified because it was coming from a source who really didn't want to see this happen to me, that I said, I need to go on the air right now and make it impossible for them to actually do this, because I got such a short window of notice that if I don't do this today, I'm probably going to be dead. What? And I do believe I probably saved my ass by doing that show. As embarrassing as it is for people to hear me scream and cry like a child, which I didn't do very much of, but there is definitely some.
Right.
That was not an act. That was totally real.
Did you, did you get the authorities involved? I haven't crossed that line. It's been close, but I haven't crossed that line. I'm not making light of it. I mean, how did you start to deal with it? Obviously you dealt with it on camera, but
in my mind, I was already dead. In my mind, it had already happened. The intel was so good, I didn't think I was going to make it. And I figure, well, if they're going to take me out, I'm going to at least let everybody know what happened before it happens.
And
so I didn't even think I was going to make it when I did that show.
Yeah, honestly. and then mentally, how are you, dealing with it that day? I mean, time goes by, but were you laying awake all night?
I don't really enjoy what I do anymore. I'm getting through it, but people notice I'm not updating my website as much as I used to, and
right.
It definitely kind of took the spark out. I feel like I have a sacred honor and responsibility to keep doing this, but this is not the same guy who was just talking about ETs with smiling faces that are going to beam us up into the heavens.
Right, of course.
A serious, nasty battle.
Well, and then you're walking around all day thinking about it. It's not even close to anything like that. But when I would say 99.9% of the email and tweets and interaction and phone calls and stuff are all good and positive. You're going to have people that suggest things to do things differently. That's fine. That's great. That's if somebody sends me an email that is, that means they're listening to the show, and that's all that I care about. But you get the one or two emails once in a while that are really stupid and funky. And when you get those, you just think, man, why go out of your way to do something like this? And you end up thinking about it when you don't have to. You know what I'm saying? And so for you, you're walking around thinking about this 24/7.
I started to write incisive posts on Richard Hoagland's discussion forum in '96 when he was the big guy with Art Bell, and that was the big thing. I caught a lot of attention back then. I had haters all the way back then. So I've been writing stuff online and getting vociferously attacked for almost 20 years now. And I've had my own website since 1999.
Right.
For probably about the last 8 years, I would say that my online presence has generated at least 150 unique pieces of written commerce a day, of people either writing comments on a video. It used to be all email. That's died off quite a bit because of social networking. But
right.
There's an incredible amount of stuff being written about me every day, and 150 is probably the low estimate. It could be as much as 300 to 500 pieces of writing a day about me that appear online now. I basically, as of last August or September, I finally just stopped reading it because it was driving me crazy.
Yeah.
About 2% of women, 4% of men would be technically called a sociopath or a psychopath, and this just means that they really don't have a conscience like most people think everybody does.
I remember back when I was doing my sports show, if I did, we would do 3, 4, 5 videos a day. And post out. They were shorter. This is a 3-hour show. Those were little 5-minute bursts. And but I put out a video or make a comment, and the next thing you know, and the sports world is a little bit different than this world that you and I are in. It's huge. It's big. But these posts and comments, sometimes they would be 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 long. And out of those 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 on some videos, not on every one, but probably 50% was, calling me in things I can't say on the air.
Oh yeah.
And I just, you got to do, they think you're reading all of this stuff, and I don't know why they do it, but then, you just end up going, you know what? It's not worth it. And you stop reading it. And it's bad for all of the people that are saying positive things or want to ask you questions or have something to say, and you don't get around to it because you've got to numb yourself.
Yeah, I think I listen to it on a daily basis from 1996 to 2013. So that's 17 years of basically taking every piece of feedback that anybody wrote about me. And after 17 years, it's like, okay, some people think I have a big ego, and some people are very angry that I'm making money doing what I do.
Right.
Those are the two basic things that everybody says,
Did you ever catch the death threat culprit? Okay, we'll move on. It's okay. I mean...
I never actually got specific intel on who was going to be doing this. But the same source had described threats to another major figure in my field that had gotten specific enough as to that it was going to be a staged suicide, and they'd worked it out to 3 locations that this person had in their normal day-to-day routine. And they had calculated which of the 3 it was going to be. Like there could be a suicide on the beach, there could be a driving the car off the cliff, or some incident in the home. And so I knew from past experience that we were dealing with some very effective murderers who were very thorough in their planning, and that what would be done to me would be decisive and, nothing that you can go against. What we know about this is these are teams of 5 guys. They're usually paid very well. It could be, like $1 million split amongst the 5 of them, sometimes more. And there might be 1 or 2 guys who act as a lookout, and in some cases they will actually make you commit suicide and write your own suicide note because they hold a threat over your head that says basically, look, dude, we're sorry, we're just doing our job, but we're going to whack you either way. There's nothing you can do about it. You're trapped. We've got you in handcuffs. If you do write this letter, we're going to leave everybody else alone. If you don't write this letter, we're going to take out everybody you've ever cared about.
Wow.
So that's the kind of shit they do.
Wow. And bodyguards? I mean, what did you? Did you not react or have a knee-jerk reaction?
I do now have security at my events by necessity. I have had to be less trusting of random folks that come to events, and in general, I've tapered back on doing events. I only have had 2 so far this year. I have a 3rd one coming up in August, Contact in the Desert. But I'm doing a lot less than I was before, and thankfully my television show helps me pay the bills without having to be in public like that.
Right. In Joshua Tree with Graham?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's going to be a pretty cool event.
Yeah, for sure.
The obvious question is this. Was it because you were getting too close to knowledge? Or you found out, not even too close, but did you find something out? Or
yes.
Is it something that you want to talk about?
I don't mind at all.
Okay, let's go.
It's all public, so there's nothing new that I can say about this that would get me in any more trouble than I was back in 2011.
Okay, yeah, nobody's. We're alone right now, Dave. So
The story in this case relates back to the largest organized crime syndicate on Earth, and that organized crime syndicate has a very rich and complex history because if you really, really go deeply into this, and this is going to immediately put me into David Icke category, but you're dealing with good ETs and bad ETs out there in the universe. There's humans all over the place. Most of the ones that are out there with space travel actually are good, but some of them are not. And as it turns out, Atlantis was actually all these pyramids and so forth. Atlantis is just a term, but the pyramids, the standing stones, a lot of that stuff was built by people who colonized the Earth but were not native to this planet. And that's why the archaeologists are so frustrated, because they don't find pottery shards and artifacts that would indicate a logical progression of technology building up to a point where they can build pyramids and levitate these huge blocks of stone. So ideally, we would have all that evidence there, but instead we just see these incredible works that show up basically out of nowhere. So the legend is that apparently some of the people that built this stuff, that were part of this civilization that colonized the Earth, did survive this Atlantean catastrophe, which was basically Antarctica used to be in the equator region, and there was a pole shift on Earth caused apparently by a nuclear war that happened. There's depictions of this nuclear war in the surviving Hindu scripture like the Mahabharata. That was one warring faction that was originally in Siberia, and they then migrated into Iran and India as the Aryans. The opposing faction was also in an Arctic region now, which is Antarctica, before that became covered with ice. And in the Plato's version of Atlantis, he says that they had fought off an Atlantean invasion in the area around Egypt and Greece. And shortly after they won that war, there was this terrible flood. So it appears that the nuclear weapons that we read about in the Mahabharata, where they say a single bolt of iron charged with the light of 1,000 suns, and they describe elephants dying, of very clear examples of radiation sickness. They even describe the shadows that are formed, like we saw in Hiroshima when a blast goes off. So what appears to happen is that there was this big nuclear war. My guess is that the side that was the Hindu side struck against the Atlanteans, caused the Earth to shift, but some of these people survived. They went undercover, and society quickly reverted back to a primitive state. Now, I will share some things that I haven't said before, and that is that when you get this much technology, an interesting thing happens. The more advanced your society is, the less technology you need. So if you read many of these ancient Chinese accounts, they talk about the gods having something they called a magic mirror. Well, if a primitive person saw you using, for example, an iPad mini, they might call it a magic mirror because what they see is a mirror-polished glass surface that has all these interesting things on it that it shouldn't have, and they'll say, well, that's magic. So I've spoken to people in the government working at high levels of classification who've said that the ET humans have iPads that are like way, way better than what we have, including like holographic displays that pop up in front of you. And in some cases, you can actually like feel it. You can touch the hologram, and it has some kind of gravitational field, so you feel what you're touching, and you can manipulate things in that space and move them around.
We're doing that today, so it's not as far-fetched, with our mindset today. We know what's out there, but coming in ancient text, that's a strange reference.
So the point is, these people had iPads that could do things like generate gravitational fields to lift blocks of stone, communicate telepathically, materialize objects out of thin air, we're just starting to see that now with 3D printing. They have a much more advanced version of that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And once these people went through a cataclysm, remember, they were not growing crops. They were not having to raise food in any of the normal ways. Their little iPads could make all the food for them they needed.
I got an email, I'm going to say about 3 months ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I forget who was on the show, but we were talking about lost civilizations and, the gap between Göbekli Tepe and the pyramids and, standard stuff. And this guy wrote me and he said, this is the problem with all of you ancient astronaut types, that you don't give credit that maybe man could have built, and he went on to say, I'm an archaeologist, and this BS just, you don't get it, you don't understand. And my point is, what they stop short of every single time of making that point, but not explaining how all of this stuff got done.
Yeah.
That's the problem that I have. If you're going to go, and at least we have a hypothesis, or we have a way of trying to make sense of it all, but the mainstream orthodoxy does not present a solution to anything. And if you want to sit here and tell me how they drag those stones 250 miles across Wales, or or how those pyramids, if I could go back with a time machine, and I've said this many times, but if I could go back, would I go back to the crucifixion? Okay, that would be good. I would like to, go witness the resurrection and hang out at the Last Supper. I would like to see how those events went down, of course.
Yeah.
But you know what? I think I'm going 2,500 years before that.
Right.
I'm going to Giza. I want to see exactly how that got done. And that's it. Because and when we talk about Merlin, or we talk about levitation or sound, or how, you know what? All of that is just as valid as anything else, because right now we don't know.
That's for sure. And it requires us to expand our imagination. And part of the problem is that people don't even have an imagination that is cultivated and capable of taking in what might be the truth.
And that's the point. And as long as orthodox archaeologists out there don't present or stay silent, well, then there we go. We fill in the blanks. And if you don't like it, well, come back with something. Just don't call, anybody with alternate beliefs crazy or nutcases, because you're not presenting anything to us either. And when one of the things, where did all the lumber come from that they're rolling 100-ton stones across? In my eyes, that stuff would crumble into toothpicks anyway. But where did all of that come from in the desert? I don't know.
How do you generate the morale for people to want to keep doing this?
Yep.
There's one island in the middle of the Philippines called Bohol, and the Bohol government doesn't even have it together enough to finish building one official hotel on the island. It's only half constructed after all these years. They've got 1,776 conical pyramids, cone-shaped pyramids, each of which is about 50 meters tall, which is comparable to any of the pyramids you see in South America and Central America. So how do you get people to do that 1,776 times and still have good morale?
Whips and chains. Yeah, exactly. And for them,
it's ludicrous.
It is. And
then there's all these pyramids that shouldn't even be there, that are way too old and way too big. There's Lalakan in Indonesia. There's, of course, the pyramid in Bosnia that has been extensively researched by Samir Osmanagic. And, that one is like twice the size of Giza at least. And people just think it's a mountain, but it's very symmetrical. It's got all four sides perfectly square. It's got the right slope angle. So we're finding out now, and Linda Moulton Howe actually has covered this pyramid in Alaska that's still under the ice. And the government has done a huge, huge cover-up around that one. There was another one recently that was over near Portugal. It's off in the water off Portugal. It's perfectly symmetrical. There's another one that you probably remember that was off the western tip of Cuba that was discovered by two oceanographers, Paulina Zalitsky and Paul Weinsweig.
I've still been waiting for the results of that research. I mean, it definitely, when everything was first announced about it, it was like, wow.
Oh, yeah.
And so I'm still waiting for that. I want it to be what it's supposed to be. That's for sure. Let me ask you, I've got a couple of emails that have come in, and this one, I'm going to throw this at you really quick. It's David made a claim on Coast to Coast or another show several years ago where he said, and I think this is a paraphrase, but I remember it, and I know you'll remember it too. It goes on to say, the only people that actually seem to have been generated by the Earth's own evolution are black people. Those are the only racial type that we have on Earth that you don't see in people that come from other planets, and that makes them very special. Given the fact, and now this is the question, given the fact that the universe is infinite in size, does David still stand by this claim? Also, is he familiar with Carrie Cassidy's interview with Norman Berggren, where he talks about the ET ship that's, okay, you know what, let's get to this next question, about the Voyager being picked up by ET. So we'll come back to that. But what about this, the first part? And, you said something about the skin is not dark, but really black.
Yeah, now, okay. This is where it starts to get strange. You have to remember that we as a society do not want to interfere with a primitive culture. Like if there's a culture in Borneo that's never been contacted by modern humans, as soon as we go in there, something happens called enculturation. Next thing you know, their languages get lost, We're losing hundreds, if not thousands, of languages a year because of enculturation right now.
Right.
And they lose their language, they lose their customs, they very quickly adapt to whoever has the new stuff, because they want the new stuff. It appears that there is a greater form of that that's taking place on a cosmic level that we could call in Star Trek like the Prime Directive, in which there are, in fact, many, many human civilizations out there. And the surprising part is that there are many of them that look almost indistinguishable from us. There are people, for example, one type looks like somebody from the Polynesian Islands. But these people, you tell them because they all wear a certain type of uniform. Most of the people that have achieved space travel have intelligent nanotech clothing that's made of a series of little nanotech robots that all kind of are holding hands electronically. So they clean your body and they protect you as you go through transdimensional portals. And the clothing also could react. So like if somebody tried to shoot you with a gun, it would intelligently tighten up that area to repel the bullet. So it's like the perfect bulletproof vest. So these people have some very, very advanced technology. And probably the biggest, most embarrassing secret that is the hardest for people to understand is that our governments, some governments on Earth, have never stopped being in contact with these people. And I mean never stopped, meaning they've had stargates on Earth for at least 10 or 11,000 years. They've never gone away. We know, for example, this is from very high-level sources, that the last 100 years of American presidents have all had in-person human extraterrestrial contact. So it does not start with Roswell. It starts at the beginning of the 20th century. They all had these people show up in their office. And by these people, I mean people who look human. Some of them look like they could be Native Americans. Some of them look like they could be Asians. Some of them look like they could be Scandinavian. Some of them look like, as I said, people from the Polynesian Islands. But the one thing that is an interesting fact, getting back to this question, is that every person I've spoken to who's actually met these humans, out of all the different types that they've seen, not one of the humans that have visited us from other planets look like Aborigines or blacks. And Aborigines and black people actually are more genetically different than anybody else on Earth in terms of their DNA. There's like a spectrum where blacks would be all the way on one side and Aborigines would be all the way on the other side, and everybody else in between is more genetically similar. But I was told from some insiders, for example, that the reason why most people on Earth get sunburns is that we didn't naturally evolve here, we were put here, and this planet isn't really right for us in terms of the climate and the intensity of the sun. You can get a lot of different types of solar radiation depending on what planet you're on. And most people, that would include Caucasians and Asians and so forth, we're not really built to be on this planet per se. So we get sunburns and we have some other symptoms and side effects. A lot of us get back problems. And part of the reason why we have such a problem with our back is that that the gravity on this planet is a little bit off for us. It's a little bit too strong.
That's interesting. And also the whole vitamin D,
yep,
aspect of, why it is necessary for some of us and not all of us, but it all involves the sun. That's...
Yep. Skin problems is another one.
Yep.
Baldness is another one.
Yep.
Circumcision was originally something that we started on Earth because the extraterrestrial humans that visited us did not have a foreskin, and we did, and we wanted to emulate what they looked like. There's also a variety of cultures that started to bind the heads of their children because these ETs had these elongated skulls, and they wanted their kids to look like that.
Right. Oh, is that you? That's you?
That's my phone. I'm going to turn the ringer off. Sorry about that.
That's Radio 101, David. Yeah. Oh. Let's. I want to get back to a couple of things really quick before I let this get
So
away
just to
from.
button that question, because somebody might be really concerned about this, I'll just say that as far as we can tell, black people are actually what the Earth would have made on its own. Now, bear in mind, though, that everybody is a hybrid, because if you go far enough back, everybody was tampered with by the Anunnaki, who mixed their own genetics with the people that were already on Earth. And that's like going back now 500,000 years ago. So we all have extraterrestrial DNA. There is no totally purebred human. But it does appear that the blacks and aborigines are much older and more native to Earth than any other species or any other type of human race that we see. That's what we've seen, because I know like probably 7 or 8 people that have interacted with multiple types of these humans, and not one of them has ever met anybody who looks black, ever.
Well, I've never heard the description. This is funny. With everything that is going down in Los Angeles today, I don't even want to mention, anything like it's like great. It's such a touchy subject.
Oh yeah.
And I declined to mention it during the opening of the show, and of course I'm referencing the Clippers and the fabulous Donald Sterling idiot. But it's a touchy subject
For sure.
And you would think with the maturity of us humans, us Earthlings, that at some point we move on and above and get past this racial divide that is there. It's uncomfortable for everybody, and I thought that we had moved on. Here in LA, this is one thing that people need to understand. Different than any other place probably on planet Earth. Even more so probably than New York City, in that here in LA, everybody just gets along, because there are no minorities. There's
right.
not. It's all a majority here. And no matter what street you walk down, no matter what city you go to here in LA, everybody just gets along. Whatever the media will say, that's different. As a citizen of Los Angeles, like you are, and myself, we know you if you go down 3rd Street Promenade in Santa Monica and you're white, you're the minority. Or if you go down, you know what I mean? It's just.
I think that's true. Yeah.
Yeah, it is true.
I never really thought about it that way, but I guess that's true. Yeah.
But you can't think about it that way, and that's my point. It's just the way that it is. And for this stuff that has just popped up this week, for us in LA, that's why it's such a big deal, because we really don't deal with that. We've moved on from it, and it's shocking to me that somebody like in his position is freaked out about what his friends say.
I mean, my father was rescued by a black man when he missed the bus when he lived in Boston, and he started to try to walk home through this really ghetto part of Boston. And this black man had pity on him and said, wow, this little white kid's not going to make it. And he rescued him and drove him home. And that created in my father's mind an incredibly positive association with black people, literally saving his life. And I think he actually appreciates black people even more than white people. So my father then really became obsessed with black music and blues. And then as the 60s rolled on, blues became the archetype of all rock and roll. And my father wrote about rock and roll, and I met all the rock bands. And so I also met a lot of very famous black artists, a lot of the famous black bluesmen, B.B. King. My father wrote the book on Buddy Guy, the biography, and he's the inspiration for Jimi Hendrix.
Absolutely. Wow. Did he really?
Yeah. Yeah. So I grew up going backstage and meeting all these people, and I just wasn't raised to be racist at all. I had a friend who was black in school. He was the only black kid in school because I lived in kind of a white area, which most people in upstate New York do. You're either in a black town or a white town.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But, I just never even understood racism. I had trouble understanding anything about it, and, you got to imagine what it would be like for people who are not born on this planet but are still human. And they can monitor our internet, and they can monitor our television and radio and everything. Imagine how it looks to them when we can't even accept each other on Earth. And then let's say you got some people who have some differences from us. Maybe their teeth look different, or maybe they have purple irises, or maybe they have ridges inside the top of their mouth like the mouth of a cat, or they might have an extra finger on each hand, or they might be a lot shorter than we are, they might be taller than we are, they might have... We know that the humans that are out there, some of them have pastel-colored skin.
Exactly. It goes both
pink
ways.
Ones, yellow ones,
yes.
Orange ones, green ones, blue ones, every color you can think of.
Fat, skinny,
yeah.
Male, female.
And some of them are quite disturbing to look at.
Totally.
Some of them that don't look like us.
Some look very alien.
Yeah.
When I have somebody question me about that exact subject, or it could be somebody over here for dinner or whatever, and they go, but you have Greys and you have Nordics and you have reptilian. Why are they all different? I said, look, man, think about planet Earth. If somebody came here and saw, somebody that was Asian and then saw somebody that was African American, and one was male and one was female and one had red hair and one had, next thing you know, they would think that they're looking at two different species.
That's true.
We can run the gamut of what we accept as humans.
Apparently we have far more racial diversity on this planet than most inhabited worlds in our galaxy do.
If that's the only way to look at it. And so you would have to, and also the question of spacecraft and UFOs. Why are they so different? Well, look at what we drive here.
Oh,
and
totally.
look at what we fly here. It's all over the map. It's not everything is exactly the same. Period.
There's so many different ways to achieve the same results too. I know one guy who has 8 different ways of doing anti-gravity that he developed with the military-industrial complex. So there's all kinds of different ways to get there, and there's all kinds of different technologies that get you there, and there are some that would be considered more advanced and some that would be considered less advanced. And another kind of embarrassing reality is that within this, what some call the breakaway civilization, they ignore a tremendous amount of ruins. They just don't even bother to look at it. For example, we know there are hundreds of miles worth of building corridors, hallways in buildings on the moon, hundreds of miles worth of ruins that you can walk through that have technologies that pop on when you walk past them, and they all light up as you walk past them.
Where did you find out this type of information?
The whole dark side of the moon right now looks like a gigantic parking lot. It's loaded with ships coming and going. There are all kinds of ETs around us, and they're all basically holding off a little bit longer. It's probably only a few years left before we get brought into this galactic neighborhood. And we're in the waning days of that before that happens. But
have you been to? Do you ever spend time on skywatchers.net?
I have not.
Okay, I believe that's what it's called. Man, it's anyway. It's a couple of guys that have telescopes on the moon 24/7, right?
Yeah.
Always, and you can just go and just sit there long enough. If you spend enough time, something will pop up, and it's crazy. So I'm watching it today, and I think it was yesterday or a couple of days ago. There's this whole fleet of UFOs, and I'm talking about it was like 20, just shot right across the moon. You could see the shadow on the moon, sir, and it was just like this crazy thing. Now, anybody can put a telescope up in the backyard and check this out, but what we do have now, which we didn't have 25 years ago, and you and I were talking about this earlier today, with the advent of the internet, now this stuff is broadcast to anybody all the time. Everything that you fill in the blanks, that they didn't want you to see, they can't stop that now. And you
let me share something interesting with you that I actually haven't said anywhere publicly before. There are so many UFOs that are actually operating around the Earth and in our atmosphere at all times that there are some areas over America where if you could see what was going on, it would be as busy as the 405, literally.
I made
which is the big highway in Los Angeles.
The big one. I made a comment on rents.com years ago on one of his forums. And I made a comment, and the comment was this: look, if everything that was photographed today, was not of this earth, with the amount of photographs that are going on, then we would have the 405 freeway bumper to bumper outside of planet Earth.
Absolutely.
So my feelings with that have changed a little bit. In that, yeah, I was wearing my skeptic hat back then because we would be seeing stuff getting here. But, I think that they're not actually traveling here in a conventional means because there would be no way to travel here in a conventional means. They're folding space. It's some kind of parallel. Something's going on, whether it's a wormhole or I don't know how they're getting it done, but they are getting it done.
There's wormholes all over the place. We haven't really done any space travel, and the space travel, what little we have done has been highly regulated and classified. But there are plenty of places that you can fly around where if you just fly into one area, you're going to pop into a Stargate. It doesn't matter. You will fall into the Stargate and you will go through a portal, period, if you try to fly through that area. Nothing you can do about it.
Here's a quick, I just want to get back to this. This came in from Twitter. Do you or David believe the ancient, I'm only reading this because this is a bit different for a question. And I've never had this one thrown at me. Do you or David believe that ancient aliens could be time travelers going back with our modern technology?
That is definitely one type. But I think that the inherent limitation in most people's imagination is they have a totally difficult time embracing the bigness of the puzzle that we're looking at. There are probably, I've heard from one of the highest level sources who actually works within this breakaway civilization as a routine part of his work, that even if you go out 100 light years, you start getting a few dozen inhabited worlds. And by the time you go out 1,000 light years, you've got probably several hundred inhabited worlds. So almost everywhere that you see a star, you're going to see some kind of intelligent life in the planets that star has around it. Most stars have planets. Planets can hold life at a lot of different levels too. And I want to tie back to something I was setting up before when I mentioned the 405 thing, which is the technology for them to become invisible to us. It's actually not called cloaking. It's actually called masking. And it's much, much easier to do than we think. So there are a tremendous number of ships operating around us that are masked that you can't see unless you have like 5th generation infrared vision goggles. And if you start playing around with that stuff, then you'll start to see a lot of things, especially in certain areas. There are some places right now, so I've been told, where you would see what looks like a busy highway if you had the right infrared night vision specs and just aimed it at that area of the sky. But the problem is that is a certain layer of reality that is separated from us by an energy vibration, the way that the atoms actually vibrate. And apparently what's happening is that our whole planet is up-leveling to a level where masking isn't going to work anymore. And that's really that's one of the main things that's going to collapse the whole UFO cover-up, is that our frequency is rising very quickly, and it's going to get to the point, so I've been told from very credible insiders, it's going to get to the point where they can't be kept hidden from us anymore. We're going to see them whether we want to or not. And I think one example of that just happened recently was there was this soccer game in South America somewhere, and this ghost goes running through, this shadow ghost goes running through the stadium, running right through people in the stadium. Did you see that one?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. That's, to me, an example of that the layers are starting to blend, and stuff that used to be partitioned from us that we wouldn't see is now becoming visible. And it's going to get more and more that way. You're going to see more and more UFO sightings. More and more stuff is going to become visible. And they're considering it a real problem, like in our government, because technology that used to work just fine isn't working anymore.
In what regard? What do you mean?
Masking. They can't mask. Like any C-130 ship, which is like an airplane they use to transport military hardware.
Right.
Any of the stealth stuff, any of it, they have masking that can do any conventional craft that's out there. And it used to work really well. You could fly it, and if people don't hear it, then they're not going to see anything. The light just bends around the object.
I got you.
The problem now is that stuff isn't necessarily going to work anymore. And it's the same with the UFOs, whether it's the stuff that we built or the stuff that others are using.
When we talk about, on that subject, when you talk about benevolent, bad, good, are we even prepared? If they come here with bad intentions, do we have a hope and a prayer? I mean,
absolutely.
Okay.
You have to understand that that the good ETs vastly outnumber the bad ones, and the bad ones are only allowed to do what they are permitted to do. They wouldn't be able to do anything if it wasn't for this principle of karma, in which if we create negativity on Earth, then a certain degree of negativity must be permitted to occur. But believe me, there's been a quarantine around this planet for quite some time. There's these, it's actually done through these micro drones, these very tiny satellites that are high up in the upper atmosphere. And anything that tries to fly in through this quarantine, it just bounces off of it. So it's not easy for anybody to get into this planet to begin with unless they have special technology that allows them to get through this defense grid that was actually put in place a long, long time ago.
Who put the defense grid in, them or us?
There's a group of ETs that basically protect the planet. They've been called the Watchers, or they've been called the Guardians, or the Elders. But we are actually very tightly managed so that there is never going to be, for example, a planet-killing nuclear war. There's never going to be, for example, a worldwide virus pestilence thing that kills off a whole bunch of people in the hundreds of millions. All this kind of what I call fear porn stuff that people keep getting so worked up about.
Right.
None of it's ever going to happen. You're not going to see an asteroid crash into the Earth and kill everybody. You're not going to see Yellowstone caldera blow up and wipe us out. There's a whole lot of work being done, much more than we realize, to stop an invasion of ETs, to stop any of that type of stuff from actually taking place. And that's whether our own guys try to do it to us or whether that's somebody from the outside that tries to do it to us.
Somebody out there is going to want me to ask this question. Okay, that sounds great, David. Positive, I'm with you. But where are you getting this type of information? Where is this coming from?
There are people who work for the military-industrial complex, which there's a level of clearance that's sort of like the basic beginning where you start to hear this. It's called cosmic clearance or cosmic top secret. And that's 35 levels above the President of the United States in terms of the classification level. So the President is not at all knowledgeable about this. The last president who was kind of read in on everything was Eisenhower. And then as soon as Kennedy got in office, that's when they started to really seal it off from the president completely, because Eisenhower had a very negative reaction, whereas we now know through the work of Richard Dolan and his whistleblower, Eisenhower tried to order a military invasion of Area 51 and was rebuked by the military, but he did try to get that to happen because he felt that if these guys are going to build this base and not tell him about it, that they were therefore enemies of the state and needed to be a military invasion needed to be conducted to stop them. So the president is now kept in the dark, and what's happened is that the major branches of the military, first of all, Coast Guard really doesn't know anything. Sorry, guys. Army doesn't know very much. The two big branches that you're looking at that really have all the secrets are the Air Force and the Navy. And then there's an interesting history because, first of all, the Marines are part of the Navy. The Marines were a subdivision of the Navy originally because the naval ships would transport the Marines to a given war theater. The Navy is predominantly still run by the Rockefeller Alliance, which is the sort of the Western American side of the cabal. The Air Force, back in World War II, had to work with the British because they were in that war theater, whereas the Navy had their own ships. They didn't work with the British anywhere near as much. So the Air Force integrated with the British, and all these years later, what that means is that the Air Force is much more connected to the European side of the cabal, like the Rothschilds and all that kind of stuff. So you have essentially what's turned into two warring factions in the military, the Air Force being sort of the British Rothschild faction, the Navy being sort of the American Rockefeller faction. And they both have a vast, vast military-industrial complex in which there are a whole series of defense contractors that appear to be private independent corporations, but they actually are all subdivisions of the military who then basically does no-bid contracts and pays themselves through these dummy companies to do their own work. So there is still a very active war going on, including UFOs that are owned by the Navy and the Air Force that are warring with each other, and sometimes they're actually shooting each other down because they're fighting over who's going to run this thing once they do disclosure.
There's one fascinating, you started to touch upon this right there. There's one fascinating thing when we're talking about rich families and what's going on with the military-industrial complex. And it's this thought, and it's very complex and heavy. But for us normal people that drive to work every day and we go to work at whatever, just normal, what we don't get is there are people that own military factories that make their money from going to war, and the stuff that they manufacture they have no conscience about.
Yeah,
they hope that we go to war with their machines and go and kill so they can make more machines and make more money.
Right.
It's a fascinating when you look at the complexities of that and what is the implications of that. When you may be just some guy that owns a chain of Subway shops. Okay, your deal is to make sandwiches. Okay, we got to make more sandwiches. We need to make more money. We need to expand. And somebody has that exact same thought with destruction.
Yeah,
and it's a crazy thought.
You were awakened to the truth before 9/11, just like I was. And I recall before 9/11 a real desperation on behalf of the controlled mainstream media, the cabal, to try to get us concerned enough to justify large military expenditures. And I remember before 9/11, one of the things they kept pushing was the cyber threat. They kept saying that cyber terrorism was going to take place and that it was going to just completely destroy Western civilization. And they just couldn't get enough traction to justify, okay, somebody wants to hack your computer, so we need to build a really big gun and aim it at them and shoot them.
Right. They were going to poison the water supply with cyber attacks. Yeah, and you're right, though. And they were trying to figure out I love saying they, but they're grasping at different types of straws with fear attached. Which one do we get? Let's throw a bunch of this out there, and like you said, one of it's going to get traction, and we'll grab onto that fear, whatever it is, And then 9/11 happened, and their prayers were answered when it came to that.
Well, here's a very sensitive piece of information which I will be happy to leak. Since World War II, even actually before World War II, there has been a huge game going on in which our military-industrial complex, which broke away, as I said, from elected leadership completely, they realized, or so they were afraid, that there could be a massive alien invasion that would come to this planet. And so they have been doing things, including deliberately creating wars for the last 60, 70 years, where the war is much more expensive on the books than what it actually costs to make these items. And they also did it with the Apollo moon missions. They also have done it with like the space shuttle program. There's various other things like that. But the point is, there is a tremendous, tremendous amount of black cash that has gone into building this breakaway civilization, much more than we realize. And they now have, for example, 250 underground cities, each one of which could support 65,000 people, 65,000 personnel, because some of those people are not born here. They have a vast underground train system, if you want to call it that. It doesn't function on rails. It's similar to like the vacuum thing that you see at the bank. You get into this little egg-shaped capsule, and it blows you through the tunnel with air pressure. But they have a huge underground network, which they had a plan for continuity of government and continuity of human life, so that if there was a nuclear war or an alien invasion on the surface of the Earth that basically wiped everybody out and turned the planet into a cinder, that they would still be able to make it underground. And they also have developed a great deal of off-planet platforms. We know, for example, last I heard from the best sources, our own military-industrial complex has about 200 ships that are so large that it takes 2 hours to walk from the front to the back, walking at a conventional good speed. So they're enormous, enormous ships.
I just got a text in from one of the producers here saying that we've gotten about 30 emails that they don't want to send in here. It'll just bog me down. But they're all asking the same thing: sources. Where and so where?
Okay, we can do that. We can do
let's
that.
let's.
Yeah, no problem.
Let's do that.
I will go as far as I can by saying that, and you and I discussed this before, anybody can go to projectcamelot.org, which was, the original website of Kerry Cassidy and Bill Ryan running Project Camelot. You can see me in multiple videos on Project Camelot interviewing insiders with them. I also did 3 different Project Camelot conferences in which many of their top insiders actually came forward, and I was at the same conference, therefore I was speaking to all these people. So in addition to that, you can go and see on record conversations I've had with Dr. Stephen Greer. I did his radio show on World Puja Network, in which he confirms that I was at the Disclosure Project event in May 2001. I got it like literally 2 or 3 weeks after I was on with Art Bell the first time. That's what made me a VIP. And there were 39 witnesses, 39 insiders who had high-level security clearance, and they all came forward in a press conference briefing at the National Press Club on May 9th, 2001. I wasn't invited to that, but there was another event that was taking place the next day on May 10th, which was called the Closed Executive VIP Summary Briefing for Members of Congress and their aides and VIPs. It was called the Closed Executive Summary Briefing, VIP briefing. And I was at that briefing. In fact, Helen Thomas, who had been in politics ever since the 1960s.
The Helen Thomas, the correspondent?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
She organized it. She knew that Kennedy had been assassinated. She was a good friend of Kennedy's. She knew that there was big cover-ups going on, and it was her leverage that got that into the National Press Club in the first place. And I sat directly behind her when these people were testifying in front of members of Congress who were in the audience. And I can tell you that these congressmen, when Sergeant Clifford Stone got up there and described his work with extraterrestrial crash retrievals, where he was part of a rapid recovery team that would actually go to a UFO crash, and he was the first guy to actually make contact with the ETs that were found in the ships, and it was generally a telepathic contact where he would empathize with their pain and actually feel the equivalent pain in his own body, whatever they were feeling.
You're talking about Clifford?
Yeah, he broke down in tears, and I can tell you that there was not one person in the audience who stayed in their seat when he got a standing ovation to come back on stage when he broke down in tears.
I'll say this. Clifford was on this show a couple of months ago, and he broke down, and he got me, and he's one of the guests that it's been a few months since he was on the show, and there practically is not a day that goes by that somebody doesn't see or listen to his show, on YouTube, or remember his past show and ask for him to come back on the show.
Of course.
And yeah, he's a very, and the thing is about Clifford, you just want to like him too.
Oh yeah.
He's a very compassionate guy. And I told him, I said, Clifford, quit calling me sir. And if you call me sir tonight on the show, I'm disconnecting the interview. Okay, sir, I won't. I'm like, dude, please, Clifford. But he is, yeah, okay. I'll go with you on that.
I walked right up to him because I had watched the video. It was the largest streaming demand that they'd ever had from the National Press Club server. It actually crashed the server. And so I had just seen everybody, and then I drove to D.C. from Virginia Beach, so it was a decent 4-hour drive.
Right.
And I had these brand new shoes on, and they'd actually cut my ankles to the point that they were bleeding because I didn't realize that new leather is going to ruin your skin.
Right.
But I ran into this briefing. There's blood in my socks, and I'm meeting all these people, and it was totally amazing. So if you go to the Project Camelot website, one of the most high-level insiders that they ever got who actually did come forward, in fact, probably the most knowledgeable guy who actually did put his face out there, is Henry Deacon.
Yes.
Which is a pseudonym, but there is a Zurich conference video you can watch where I was in the audience, and I ended up getting brought up on stage with Dr. Brian O'Leary, who was a trained astronaut for NASA and was going to go on a mission, and then they passed it up for some reason at the last minute. But he was a NASA astronaut. He's now deceased. But he did a whole elaborate presentation on free energy. And I went up there with him to help co-present. During the time we were up there, unbeknownst to anybody in the audience, Henry Deacon was there, and we had just pretended that he was a family member, so I was calling him Uncle Mark. And people were asking, my Uncle Mark what it was like to grow up with me and have me as, his nephew or something. But
Henry
then
Deacon.
all of a sudden,
yeah,
people find out it's not Uncle Mark. It's actually this guy, Henry Deacon, and he comes up on stage. He shows everybody that he's got this American passport, which I had seen up close, that was brown instead of blue. It was an official passport. And he went up there and disclosed his identity. And the thing is that you can go to the Henry Deacon page and see that there was a whole enormous amount of stuff that he was leaking to Camelot that had never come out in the form of a videotape interview, but the scope of his testimony was incredibly vast. And then the reason why I contacted Camelot in the first place, although it blossomed from there, but the original reason was just to get to this guy because he was so amazing. And what he said is that although the military-industrial complex is highly compartmentalized, meaning that each of the different departments that people work in, they don't know what anybody else is doing in any of the other departments. You have one job, you move this object from point A to point B, and you do it all day long, and that's all you do, or whatever it is, So he was at a level in which all the compartments melt apart, and people know the real scope of what's going on. At that level, most of these people either live in an underground base or off-planet. There are some people who are lucky enough to be able to still live on Earth and go to work and come back from work, and he was one of those people. So he reported that he would go to a series of different military bases, some of which were overseas, some of which were in America. You park your car. It's like a normal day. You go through the checkpoint. You say hello to the guy. And then what happened is that he said you would go through this thing called the corridor, and there's some military guys at the front of the corridor. There's like 5 levels of security you have to go through. And they have to do a retina scan, they do fingerprint scan, and they also ask you questions that you have to answer intelligently and correctly because they're very concerned about people that are not real people trying to get in. So part of it is you have to be able to have an intelligent conversation. So he would then walk down this corridor after he made it through that checkpoint, and it was a round hallway with kind of these scalloped ribs going down, like circles that are a little bit narrower than the rest of the cylinder that you're walking down. And then you get to the end, and there's this stairwell off to the left, and then there's an elevator. And for most people, if you don't know anything and you just go into the elevator, the door opens really slowly, you get inside, the door closes really slowly, and there's one button. It takes you up one floor, and the time that it takes the elevator to go up that floor is slower than it would take to walk up the stairs. So if you don't know anything, then you would say, well, why the hell would I want to take that elevator? It's so boring, it's so slow, it's not even worth it. What you don't realize is that people who are at the right level of security clearance, they will have a special key, it looks just like an ordinary metal key that you'd use to open up a door. You'll have that key on your keychain, and you'll have some sort of badge or special electromagnetic thing that you carry with you. And in that case, you go inside the elevator, the door closes, but then in this case, you take your ordinary metal house key and you put it into a lock that's inside the elevator. The elevator on the inside looks just like brushed chrome, like aluminum-type colored metal. You turn the key, and then what happens is the elevator reads the card that you carry with you, and that tells the elevator to send you wherever you need to go. This technology apparently is an offshoot of the Philadelphia experiment, which was a failed test of teleportation technology, and of course it had terrible effects on the crew.
Well, okay, let me jump in.
Yeah.
You're not referring to up and down. You're saying anywhere you need to go.
Exactly. So the Philadelphia experiment was a situation in which there's a guy, Jerry Vassilatos, who wrote about this, and he leaked it from insiders. And I've had 2 others or 3 others confirm this now, that Norfolk Naval Shipyard, they were testing high-intensity welding, and at the very, very high-intensity electromagnetic fields, they had all the lights go off in the factory. They couldn't figure out what was going on. Then they noticed that when the lights came back on, that some of the tools were missing. So this kept happening on some of these high-intensity welds for battleships they were building. And they eventually did high-speed filming and found out that when the high-intensity arc was made, that a little black hole would appear in the air, and the tools in the room, like hammers and screwdrivers, would start flying into the hole, and then the lights would go down. So that was the origin of what led to the Philadelphia experiment, which was essentially high-intensity electromagnetic coils that were inside a ship, as well as other coils aimed at it from outside the ship. And it did apparently teleport the ship. According to Colonel Philip Corso, it was actually a minesweeper ship called IX-97 that was teleported from Norfolk up to Rhode Island and then back down to Norfolk again. And it did apparently appear around Philadelphia as well, hence Philadelphia experiment. Some of these guys got embedded in the hull of the ship, and because the people on the ship, like if you didn't remember where the ship was, when you go into this teleportation state, everything turns gray, and you could walk around, and you could end up walking into the hull, and then when the ship reappeared, you might actually find yourself dead because you're now embedded in the hull. And that did happen to some of these people. But this is the government we're talking about, and so some human casualties are not about to stop them from perfecting a technology.
No, exactly. and back to my point, though, you know, they're when you're at that level, you have a different set of morals.
Right.
And you know, for us, like I said, the guy that owns the Subway shop, that, you know, that's making sandwiches. Well, you know what? Your ethics and your morals are on a whole nother plane to somebody that is, you know, literally building instruments of destruction and profiting from that, and their lifestyle is, you know, the Ferrari that they drive or whatever comes from a whole nother set of income. And for them to expand, for them to increase profits, right, and to return to the shareholders is bad stuff. Totally. Really bad stuff. But they still manage to go to sleep at night and raise their children and procreate. Yeah, it's frightening. Okay, I want to let's change gears. We're going to take a right turn right now.
Okay.
Last week I had on Kevin Tedeschi.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, great show, by the way. A great show. And so Kevin and I, and for everybody out there listening right now, who was Kevin? Well, Kevin was he's the CEO of Edgar Casey's ARE.
Yep.
Amongst other things, great guy, and it was a great show. And so we're talking, and somehow you came up very briefly, but and we only touched upon it for just a second, and then, you know, I told him that you were going to be on next week, but anyway, so I want to back up. Do you mind talking about the Edgar Casey reincarnation book? Can we touch upon that a little bit?
Not at all.
Okay.
I've never actually had his name outed before associated with this, so that's a bit awkward because he was essentially the main opponent to me in the ARE back when I presented myself to them.
Right.
And he has a very derogatory view of me. So.
Well, he didn't last week.
Oh, he didn't?
No.
Really?
No. So yeah, but like I said, we just talked about it very briefly, in that he, or maybe I had mentioned, you know, there are numerous people. We were talking about reincarnation specifically, and you know, there are. You're not the only person with that association, and that's how it came up. And he said, I think he said the number was around 50. Or so. But anyway, let's talk about the book.
Okay.
And how, and this is the direct question, how did you even start to figure that out or have that thought? Let's go back to that. I mean, because that's an intriguing morning when you wake up and start to have that type of vision or thought.
Yeah, it's very difficult for people to understand what it would be like to be in the position that I found myself in when I went to the local branch of the Edgar Casey Association. It just so happened that the only Edgar Casey Association that you could go to that was an official part of their organization in the entire Northeast of the United States was at this guy Skip Weatherford's house, who literally was like a 5-minute drive from where I lived in Rosendale, New York. He lived in the next neighboring town. There was hardly even, I don't think there was one stoplight between my house and his house. So that was weird enough that I could go to this guy's house that was like the ARE mainstay for the Northeast. And as soon as I walked in there, we had an immediate rapport. I had already been doing psychic readings by this point, which is a long story, but I would be able, it actually started from people that I met through the Art Bell Show and going on Richard Hoagland's discussion forum. There was a guy named Joe Mason who now has a website called greatdreams.com, and he talked about a technique that he was using called the dream voice, where he would wake up in the morning, and when he could still remember his dream, he would hear this chatter in his mind that seemed to be kind of nonsensical, but the idea was you don't analyze it, you just capture whatever you can hear and write it down without any bias or prejudice. And I then combined that technique with the remote viewing protocols that were leaked by some of the guests on Art Bell, including Dr. Courtney Brown. He wrote a book, Cosmic Voyage, that had a whole appendix in it that described exactly how to remote view. So I combined those two techniques and basically did a form of remote viewing where I focused on getting words instead of images. Most remote viewers use it for images instead of words, but I did it with words, and really, really remarkable results started to happen. It appeared that there was some intelligence that was speaking through me that was myself, but it was in some senses a much greater enhanced version of myself, like most people would think of the soul, the part of you that's beyond a physical body, the part of you that knows what you have to do on this planet, knows that you have a plan, knows that you have a goal in mind, and is the part of you that is actually writing your dreams to give you spiritual messages. It's sending you visions and omens and synchronicities and making sure that you meet the right people at the right time. And I'd had a lot of these type of things happening.
Okay, let's back up for a second. And
okay.
I'm curious. You said words instead of visions, and I get that. But when you're saying words, was it something that you were or somebody was writing down, or was it spoken to you?
Okay, good question. If you have ever had an experience of talking to one person, like let's say somebody's listening to our show right now, and they're listening to you and me talking, but they also have a TV on in the other room, and there's some commercials. And you can kind of hear those commercials if you listen to them, but you're not paying that much attention. The research that's been done in the classified programs, one of the things they found was that musicians are much better at this technique than ordinary people. Because, for example, what I'm now doing with fingerstyle guitar, I'll play a complex guitar part and be able to sing at the same time. So I can divide my mind into these two compartments. It's a similar technique where your conscious thoughts represent like the conversation that you and I are having that somebody would listen to on the radio.
Right.
But then there's other information that sort of flickers around in the background, like the TV that's on in the other room. And the goal of really good meditation is to quiet down the normal conversation that is your conscious mind so that all the stuff that's on the periphery becomes a lot louder and a lot easier to hear. So what I would do is I would listen to the stuff in the background by toning out my conscious mind to the point where it wasn't interfering very much. I mean, I still had thoughts, and I would just push them away. And listen to the background, and then in the beginning I was writing it down by hand, and fairly soon I evolved into actually recording it on a cassette tape recorder. Just with a pause button, I'd unpause it when I'd hear something, and I'd say it into the tape recorder, and then pause it again and wait until I got the next chunk.
Interesting. How do you differentiate from bogus chatter? If you
This is something that becomes pretty obvious once you have experience. What I will say, though, is that the technique does involve that you use everything. Every single thought that comes through your mind, you take down, whether you think it's good data or not. The idea is there's a certain preferential state that you want to reach called mind awake, body asleep.
Right.
Where you get so far out that you actually have an eyelid locking reflex. People don't realize this, but in order for your eyes not to pop open while you're having a dream, your body has a natural mechanism that will seal your eyes shut. and it's very difficult to open them when this locking reflex takes place. You want to get yourself so deeply entranced that the locking reflex actually happens, and if you try to open your eyes, you'd have to really push to get them open.
I do that when I'm driving. It's amazing. So, but is this channeling, or it's not really?
That's one term that people have called for it. Although I think that term has been so widely widely misused.
Right.
But you got to remember that in Tibetan Buddhism, it's called termas, and these great Tibetan monks, it's well documented for centuries. They've been doing this. They will download an ancient scripture, and if they don't get every single word of something that might be several thousand words long, if they don't get every single word exactly correct, they fail the test. And then what they'll do is they'll go off to some weird old shrine and dig out these scrolls that nobody's looked at in a couple hundred years and blow the dust off.
Right.
And pull them out, and then you have to be tested against those scrolls, and you have to get it 100% accurate. So there's a historical precedent for people being able to pull stuff in this way very, very accurately.
Right.
And, of course, the Edgar Cayce readings are an example that's unparalleled in modern history, where you have a guy who was hypnotized, and he'd go to sleep, and in an unconscious state, he would speak under hypnosis, and all you'd have to do is give him somebody's name and address, and they would agree to be at that address at a certain time. And this reading would then give them a complete diagnosis of their medical condition and prescribe a treatment that invariably was a holistic treatment incorporating spiritual healing as well as physical healing.
The fascinating thing I think for most of us with Edgar Cayce was at that point in history, he was almost unique unto himself. You know, it wasn't like he stole the idea or he was influenced by somebody else before him. And, you know, it was a complete, he was just unique. He was a unique individual. And
there was, well, that's not entirely true. I just want to state that it's not very well known that there was a movement known as mesmerism.
Yes.
In which they used these things called hypnotic passes, where it wasn't just that you would actually hypnotize somebody, it was that you would wave your hands from the top of their head down to their feet over their body while they're lying down again and again and again, and you'd hypnotize them for like an hour. And then they would go into a very deep trance state, and there were a variety of people who, when they had those hypnotic passes done to them, would be able to speak from an omniscient intelligence under hypnosis.
But
nobody was documenting any of it or really keeping a record of it before.
But I also, I mean, my memory says that was all sideshow stuff, though. And it was, you know, as opposed to Cayce, where he was getting into, you know, heavily into medical stuff. And
well, this is what's so interesting about Cayce is there were a variety of people from the medical establishment who tried to debunk him, and no one ever was able to. There was even one of the most grotesque Cayce stories is these guys were so convinced that he was acting that they actually pried one of his fingernails up from the nail bed with a knife.
Yep.
And he didn't wake up.
Kevin was telling me about that last week.
Really?
Okay. Let's back up 2 steps. So was it through the vision of words? Was it like Edgar Cayce popped up? I mean, take us to that day.
I had no idea that there was any connection between the work that I was doing and Edgar Cayce, other than on the most superficial level that I had read I had read some of the Cayce books, but really only the stuff dealing with Atlantis. I'd never really gotten that into it. I had read and actually had a thorough enjoyment of the Jane Roberts books, the Seth books, which probably part of why I was so involved with that was that my mother had had a very profound experience reading The Nature of Personal Reality, which is essentially where the term "you create your own reality" came from. It's kind of entered into the public consciousness now. That came from the Seth books, and this was apparently an entity that was, in this case, actually dictating entire books, one session at a time, thematically with a beginning, middle, and ending, And the first 2 or 3 in particular are quite amazing. There's the Seth Material, Seth Speaks,
Right.
and then Nature Personal Reality.
Right.
Then after that, they kind of all get repetitive. And in fact, Nature Personal Reality is kind of quite repetitive. The 2 that really nailed it for me were Seth Material, which is actually them writing from their own perspective, and it only has some Seth books at the end, some of the readings at the end. And then Seth Speaks is the original Seth book that was written totally by this intelligence. Those books are quite intriguing and fascinating. So I was aware of those books and a couple other things that in the fullness of time didn't end up panning out as well. I also had read another source that I was highly intrigued by called The Law of One, which again apparently was derived from channeling. It was material that came through from 1981 and 1983, in which there's a dialogue taking place the whole time between a PhD physicist named Dr. Don Elkins and this allegedly disembodied intelligence that was claiming to be 2 huge levels of evolution, actually 3 evolutionary leaps ahead of where we are now. We are in what they would call 3rd density or 3rd dimension, and they are in what they call 6th density or 6th dimension. So I had a robust background of The Law of One, the Seth books, and to some degree the Casey readings. And I'd read The Law of One beginning in January of 1996, and it wasn't until November of 96 that I started doing this dream voice stuff. And originally it seemed very private. I didn't ever think anybody would know about this besides myself. I never would have even done it if I had thought that it was going to go public. And that continued for an entire year, where I built up this relationship with this source of intelligence. And as I was saying to you, here's the most important point, is that I was dictating this into tapes, but then I would get backlogged on my transcriptions. And the typical length of the backlog was 2 weeks to a month.
Who was doing the transcribing?
I was.
Okay.
But I also was working during the day at a job in dealing with day treatment for people with developmental disabilities. And because I was the guy with the bachelor's in psychology, they threw me in the behavior room where they segregated all the people that had the most extreme behaviors. And this included things like hair mouthing, where they'd try to take your hair and put it in their mouth. This included pica, where they would eat things that were not edible, like dirt.
Yeah.
You can extrapolate from there. It was a very difficult job.
Minimum wage.
Minimum wage. I made $5.77 an hour.
Right.
And so the only time I had to do any of this other stuff was when I got home at night. And sometimes the sound of the screaming it would take about an hour for the screaming to get out of my head when I come home. I'd literally get home, get in bed in the dark, and just stare at the ceiling until the screaming stopped in my mind. And then I would get up and I would, go online. I'd listen to Art Bell.
Right.
I'd, transcribe my tapes.
Yeah, clear your mind with a little art. A lot of good that did. Jeez. Oh,
so
man.
What would happen is that these tapes would stack up on my desk. Sometimes there'd be even a stack of like 4 that hadn't been transcribed. And then I would start transcribing, and it wasn't just once in a while. It was every single time I started to transcribe these tapes, no matter how old the work was that I had done, it would invariably start describing something that I had just seen or heard right before I sat down. And so there's a variety of strange examples. I had gone to see, for example, I think it was the Episode 1, the new Star Wars film had come out. And I had just seen the film, and I came home and did some transcribing, and it referenced something that was in the film that I couldn't have known back when I did the dictation. Another example that I've shared before, but it was so amazing, so poignant, was that I had gone to a local convenience store, and there was a little girl with this orange, round plastic toy that she had on her belt. It was called a Tamagotchi. It's like this little digital chicken that you're supposed to feed, and if you don't feed it, it dies.
I still have like 20 of those here at the house. I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding. With a little battery in it. Right. And those things would die, and my daughters would just lose their minds. That was a 2-3 year period.
Well, I saw a little girl playing with this Tamagotchi, and then I went back to my desk and started to transcribe, and the very next scene was from one of my dreams where a little girl's got this orange round toy.
Right.
Probably the single most mind-blowing example of which, there was probably at least 30 or 40 that were incredible. But probably the most incredible one was that I had a girlfriend who would go to the ARE. I didn't want to go there once this whole Edgar Casey thing started to happen, which we'll discuss. But she had just gone to the ARE. She saw some guy who was only there for one day, an old friend of hers, and she asked me to stop transcribing so she could tell me a story. So I stopped the tape, and she told me that this guy had showed her pictures of a building where the top floor of the building was made to look like a UFO flying saucer with little round porthole windows on top. I said, yeah, that's cool. It'd be great to see something like that. You know, it'd be fun to go up there. Next thing I know, I go back to my tape, and I hit play, and the very next thing on the tape is my voice in a dream describing seeing a building where the top floor is fashioned to look like a UFO.
No.
Literally all the hair on my arm stood up on end.
Right.
I immediately hit stop. I rewound it. I said, come over here right now, and played it for her, and we both were just absolutely mind-blown. I started to do this for clients only after maybe, 3 years of perfecting the technique. One of the first clients I had lived in Knoxville, Tennessee, and he was very excited to get his cassette because I would mail people the cassette, and so he had been waiting. He was running out to the mailbox every day to check. He'd woken up with a dream where he was having trouble setting up a tripod for a camera, and one of the 3 legs of the tripod kept collapsing. And he goes and listens to the tape, and then in the tape, my dream that I revealed at the beginning, because I'd always have a dream for the client first that would remarkably touch on their issues every time, and I did 500 of these. In the dream, there's a tripod that wouldn't stand up straight, and one of the legs kept collapsing. And then when the reading began, and this voice that's essentially speaking as my voice, but it's some greater part of myself, and I just let it happen, I'm dimly aware of what it's saying, but I try not to track anything. I try to just let it happen. The first thing it says is the tripod represents, and then proceed to explain that he wasn't supporting himself enough, and that's what it was meant to indicate. So he was blown away and greatly regretted that he hadn't told his wife his dream before he went out and grabbed the tape in the mailbox. So I had an astonishing amount of undeniable validation that something was happening that was far more significant than just a self-delusion. And this intelligence had the ability to look at time just like it was fast-forwarding and rewinding a tape and see the most likely outcomes that would occur and reveal them in tapes and calibrate it so well that for over a year, this happened for probably the first 2 or 3 years, almost every time I sat down and started transcribing, it would describe something that I'd just seen or heard or done. Another example I'm just remembering now is I was in Woodstock because I lived in Rosendale, which is right near Woodstock, New York, where the famous festival was.
Been there.
And I was in some kind of Jewish deli, and I'd had a sandwich, and there was a guy there who was a big, a lot of people in Woodstock are hippies, meditators, new agey types.
They never left. They were there in 69 at 18, and they never left. Yeah. Tons of
So we're
them.
having this whole conversation. He got all into Joseph Campbell, which I love Joseph Campbell's work, and he knew more about it than I did. And he gave me this whole big thing, this whole big dissertation on the idea that we're all really looking at the same thing when we see different religions. We think the religions are different, but they're really not. And Campbell's line was that it's just different forms of software of accessing the same hardware, which is this universal mind. And so I was really blown away by that. I said, wow, that makes a lot of sense. It's just different operating systems that we're using. I come home from this trip. I sit down. I say, now feels like a good time to transcribe. And the very first thing is my voice speaking on behalf of these higher forces saying, we are downloading and installing new software. The first thing it said. I mean, that's another one where all the hair on my arm stood up.
What do you do? What do you do when you have the email and the YouTube videos that are going, Wilcock's a fraud?
There's some horrible, horrible hate out there. If people want to hate me, they can find all kinds of things they'll love to see.
And how do you deal with it? And do you ever address it directly?
Well, everybody wants proof. Everybody wants validation. Part of the validation is I've had 500 clients. Any one of them, well, probably not all of them, but I would say probably at least 20 to 30% of them, if it ever came down to that, would probably be willing to catch my back and confirm what would happen, which is that I would dream a dream for them that would so remarkably give details about their personal lives that they would burst into tears. In fact, people crying on the phone was so common that I had to learn to not empathize with the crying because it would interfere with my ability to do the job.
Right.
So I'd talk to people for back in those days, it was all 90-minute cassette tapes. As you probably remember, 120-minute, you have the risk of it breaking and being eaten by the machine.
Warbling.
Yeah, so 90 minutes is about the longest cassette you could use. So what I would do is I'd talk to people for 45 minutes on the first side and just kind of get to know them, and then and tell them the dream that I had that morning, which was invariably about them. And then the second 45 minutes, I would do this reading. And so I have every single cassette of every single reading I've ever done. I still have all of them. A lot of those were private, so I couldn't just start disclosing everybody's readings, but there's tons and tons and tons of recordings of people just bawling when I tell them these dreams.
Is that like a burden? How do you feel about that? And do you have to hold back sometimes where you just know somebody doesn't need to hear this? And they could be also, you have the obligation of maybe dealing with somebody that might not be mentally stable.
I had a few difficult clients. I would say that the only cases of genuine client dissatisfaction, there was one or two cases where I did a reading for somebody when I really shouldn't have, when I had low energy, I was weak and tired, and I let them push me into it. One was on a trip in Egypt, and another one was at the tail end of a conference that I did in San Francisco. And in those two specific cases, it was still a reading, but it was fairly generic, and those people didn't feel like it had enough connection to their personal lives that they enjoyed it. So there was a couple fails like that out of 500, and then there were maybe about 4 clients out of 500 where they got very, very angry about their reading.
Mm-hmm.
And in one case, this woman literally stormed out of my apartment and didn't want to be. She demanded that I, give her money back because she'd paid me at the beginning, and I did.
Okay.
I said, no problem. If you don't like it, I'm not going to try to take your money. And then about 10, 11 minutes later, I hear this knock on the door, and she comes back in the house and she says, I couldn't start my car. That's the first thing she said. And I'm just kind of like standing there trying not to laugh, like, okay,
right.
You couldn't start your car. Why couldn't you start your car? She's like, well, I couldn't see the ignition. Okay, why couldn't you see the ignition? Then she starts crying. She says, because there were so many tears in my eyes. I'm like, oh my God.
Okay.
Right?
Oh, well, I think you misunderstood the question, actually.
Okay.
I appreciate your candor, but no, what I'm saying is, do you ever find yourself holding back because you're dealing with somebody that probably couldn't handle the information?
Oh, yeah. No, I called that absolutely. I called it the rule of 10%.
And
you
what
never
about
give people more than 10% of what you could tell them, because it's gonna break the circuitry.
That's what I'm saying. And
Yeah.
how do you recognize somebody that could be, mentally unstable or not prepared for what you're about? And because you have a moral obligation, you don't need to push somebody over the edge.
Yeah. Part of why I had to stop doing this, part of why I retired, even though, I was making a living from it just barely. I mean, I could only do 12 a month. I could do 3 out of 4 weeks a month every other day. So I could do like 12 a month. And I only charge $150 a client, so it was just barely enough money to get by. But what happened was that people couldn't handle more than a certain amount of truth, and I would burn out if I did too much. So I would talk to people, and towards the end, what happened was that I started to get more and more public and more well-known, and people's expectations started to go up. And the ultimate reason why I retired in 2005 was that people started to expect too much. People started to have me on a pedestal. They started to think they were going to get more than they could get. So here's a very interesting phenomenon. The reading was not of any better quality than the quality of the soul's path of the person that was coming to me for the reading. So if somebody wasn't really trying very hard, like, for example, if I had a guy who was a severe alcoholic and beat his wife, which I did have,
right,
then basically he's going to be told, stop drinking and deal with your anger. But I had a lady who was a very advanced spiritual seeker who, unbeknownst to me before the reading started, she was writing all these poems and songs, and the reading was actually quoting her poems and telling her, I had no idea she even wrote these poems. The reading actually quoted from the poems and then not only told her the words, but actually explained why she had written these poems and what they meant and what her soul was trying to tell her by having her write those lyrics. So it was very bizarre because I could not guarantee quality.
Right.
I could only guarantee that there would be a reading and that something would happen. Everybody got something they enjoyed, but some people did complain that it was generic, whereas other people got dazzlingly proficient psychic time-bending stuff that couldn't have possibly come out unless there was some sort of omniscient intelligence speaking.
Okay, I've got a bunch of email in front of me, and so I'm going to bang through these.
Okay.
Since they got in here to me, that they are relevant, so they should be good. But I'm just going to open them up and go. You ready?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, first question. This is from Renee in Tucson. What is the scientific cause of the current rising vibration rates on and around Earth? See, we've got good listeners, man.
Okay.
Digest that one.
Sure. The actual answer is a little bit complicated, but I can give you the answer. The answer is that there is a companion star to our own star that the Freemasons are all over. It's what the all-seeing eye represents. They also call it the Black Sun. There's the Order of the Black Sun that the Nazis were all about. It's in many cultures, including the Aztecs. They all talk about the Black Sun. Unbeknownst to most people, there is this large gravitating body. The Sumerians called it Nibiru, and we are orbiting this body. But Zecharia Sitchin thought it was a 3,600-year orbit. That's actually incorrect. It's a 25,000-year orbit. At the end of that orbit, there is a geometric energy field that is created by the resonance of that star, and that would be a long discussion that I'd gladly have, but I don't know how much we can go into it here.
Right.
But when you come into that energy field, there is a very noticeable change in the basic frequencies of matter and energy. The first full-length show I had with Art was with Richard Hoagland, in which I was unveiling the work that I'd done. This was back in, I think, 2004, where I took NASA studies and showed that every planet in our solar system is experiencing remarkable climate change. The sun is at the highest level of solar energy output in the last 8,000 years right now. Mercury has grown a magnetic field in just the last 20 years. Venus is having a huge increase in the green glow on the night side, huge increase in the amount of ozone in its atmosphere. Mars is having the growth of clouds and ozone, and what NASA calls global warming is taking place. The ice caps are melting. Jupiter is having a tremendous global warming. Saturn is having huge X-ray bursts coming out. There's also remarkable increases in the brightness and temperature of the aurora at the north and south pole of Saturn. Uranus is having a tremendous increase in the number of bright spots across its surface. Neptune has had a 40% brightness increase in the level just above the visible light spectrum called near-infrared. Pluto, actually, even though it's moving away from the sun, has had a 300% increase in its atmospheric pressure. And then on Earth, just since 1973, we've had over a 400% increase in all earthquakes above 2.5 on the Richter scale. Since 1875, there's been a 500% increase in volcanic activity. There's a new belt that showed up in the Van Allen radiation belts around the Earth's outer atmosphere that they actually call New Belt in NASA, which they say they've never even seen inside the sun and planets before. It's only usually between stars. And we also now are seeing a huge growth in these so-called noctilucent clouds, which are these bright clouds outside the Earth's atmosphere. So the whole solar system is having a very remarkable, measurable, discontinuous change in the activity of the planets. And then you can actually trace this in the human genetic record. The most phenomenal study that showed up after all these years is from Dr. John Hawkes, who is an anthropologist who works for University of Wisconsin. And he DNA tested all these mummies and found that in the last 40,000 years, human evolution has remarkably increased, and specifically in the last 5,000 years, the human genome, the actual structure of the DNA, if you DNA tested in a computer, has changed by 7%, which is unprecedented. And so he says that we are in the midst of this very rapid evolutionary change, which is very difficult to understand. There's also a survey that was done of 1,500 skulls from America, dating from the mid-1800s up to 1980 or thereabouts, in which they found that the average American's brain size has increased by the mass of a tennis ball, meaning that if you pushed a tennis ball into the brain, it would increase the mass by that much. So my point in saying this is there is a measurable interplanetary climate change effect, and there is a corresponding genetic change that's actually happening that's measurable in our DNA and in our overall level of intelligence, evolution, etc.
What part of the 25,900 year cycle are we in?
We just ended the whole cycle on December 21st, 2012. The Mayan calendar is 5,125 years long, and that actually is exactly 1/5 of the cycle, precisely measured. And in my first book, The Source Field Investigations, I have all the scientific data. There's over 1,000 academic references in that book, and the scientific data shows that if you look at the basic counting units of the Mayan calendar, they're all calibrated to the orbits of the planets. The basic counting unit that they use throughout Mesoamerica is called the Tzolk'in, which is 260 days, and it's a junction of the cycle 20 and the cycle 12.
Right.
It's 12 units of 20, and that basic counting cycle of 260 days is the root common denominator of all the orbits of the inner planets, meaning the orbits of the inner planets are all perfect multiples of 260 days in length, down to the decimal point.
Okay, we're going to bang through some more questions. Here we go. Since aliens are watching over us, what is with diseases, disasters, and global warming?
Okay, this gets into a very interesting conundrum, which is the whole Jesus as the comforter phenomenon that happens in religion, in which people feel like, if there is a God, then why did this bad thing happen? If God existed, then he's supposed to take care of me, and he's supposed to wrap me up and keep me warm so I can suck my thumb and eat candy and not get fat.
Okay. Yes.
Doesn't work that way.
Well, it doesn't.
The universe is meant to teach you through experience, and if you go and hurt people, you don't get a free pass. The problem is that on this planet there's a lot of bad stuff that we've done to each other, and on a greater level, what we need to see is that we don't just go to heaven after one life just because we say that we were saved by the blood of Christ, or whatever other religion tells you that if you follow this way that everything's good. Jesus himself taught reincarnation. Casey was very big on trying to restore that teaching. And Jesus told this to Apostle Peter, who then shared it with St. Clement of Alexandria, who then shared it with Origen. And Origen's writings are the seed of the New Testament and modern Christianity. That was what inspired the New Testament to be put together in the first place. So those, according to Origen, the big secret of Jesus was reincarnation. So when Jesus says, the new heaven and new earth, or the kingdom of the Father, he's not talking about something that you automatically get to just because you decide that you're saved. You have to earn it. It doesn't just happen. And the way you earn it is by balancing your karma, which of course is in the biblical parable, as you sow, so shall you reap. And the Hindus and the Buddhists would call it the law of karma, which basically just means cause and effect.
Well, what about the global warming aspect? Couldn't we expect some ET intervention there? If you know what I mean. I mean, that's something that is kind of a...
There, and you have to realize too, this gets into a very subtle inquiry. It's something that's kind of hard to do in a machine gun speed question and answer session, but
I'm sorry, but I've
okay.
got more coming too. So
the idea is that the universe ultimately, this is what it says in all the best intuitive sources as well as all the ancient spiritual traditions. The universe is alive. So we have to redefine life as that we live in a biological universe. We live in a universe that makes biological life. Consciousness is one of the basic building blocks of the universe. I have a wealth of scientific data I could go on for hours about, showing that DNA coalesces out of the basic laws of quantum mechanics itself.
Right.
That the quantum field is built to make life, and that's why there's humans all over the place, because there is an intelligent template that intends for us to be in the bodies that we're in now, and ultimately to graduate to higher grades of evolution, where we become much more capable of doing these miracles like you see with Buddha and Krishna and Jesus. So that's all part of apparently what we're supposed to go through. Now the thing is, it's not like some cosmic light switch gets flipped off at the end of this 25,000-year cycle and we all burst into light body.
Right.
You have to actually choose on your own to go through that. The predominant way that the universe uses to get us evolved is called initiation. And what initiation ultimately means, if you understand it deeply enough, is the mirror principle, which is that whatever we do is going to be mirrored back to us. It's karma. It's cause and effect. So there is no such thing as a private thought or a private action. If you abuse someone, that will come back to you. If you have a negative thought, it's known to everyone in the cosmos. And that means that there's a lot of hidden evil that's been taking place, or negativity, behind closed doors, like, abuse happening in families or abuse happening in the workplace, etc. And so what we're seeing on the global level is a mirroring of that with corrupt governments and, in some cases, Satanism taking place in these inner circles of, Illuminati or whatever you want to call it. And we're also seeing, so that's one level which is becoming increasingly glaring, like the NSA surveillance. That's initiation. That's getting us to look at that there's some really ugly stuff out there, and what it does is it inspires us to change within ourselves so that we don't act that way. But then also there's physical initiation, in which the planet itself is very definitely, from a physical perspective, is definitely in crisis. We can look at our society objectively and say we are suicidal, and these governments are standing in the way of us being able to save the planet And in fact, they could destroy the planet. So,
well, could we expect? Let's look at a supposition. What if global warming, whether that's real or not, that's another issue. But let's just say something happens with the sun, and temperatures are rising here. We're about to. Could we expect an ET intervention, or would they just move us off world and go to the next planet? Such as what happened with Mars. I think we could all probably assume there was life there at one time a couple of million years ago.
There have already, Jimmy, been kill shot coronal mass ejections that barely missed the Earth.
Absolutely.
And if they had hit us, it would have taken down the entire half of the Earth that was facing it, all the power grids,
all the
and
satellites,
it would have melted all the transformers.
Right.
And it would have taken 20 years at least to build them all back up again.
Correct.
Now, what I'm saying is there is a reason for why those CMEs were not released to hit the Earth. There are people at that level, if you want to call them people or beings, that are so much more evolved than we are and have so much better of a handle on this physical reality that we live in, that they are ensuring that things just keep on humming along. So,
okay.
Ever since I've been online, back to 1995, when I first got a computer with the first time I was online was AOL at 3300 baud.
Oh, remember those days.
And I didn't even realize that my modem would actually do 14,400 kilobytes per second. Oh, my God.
That was big time.
Yeah.
You were big time in it.
All the way back then, it was all fear porn. It was FEMA camps and martial law. And
right.
They're going to take everybody's guns, and they're going to repeal the Constitution. There's going to be this massive disease and this massive plague, and then Art had the folks on talking about the Y2K, and all the computers are going to go down. It was one thing after another, and bear in mind that I've had access to so many insiders now. I hear plans like this all the time, and I finally decided I'm not even going to leak them anymore, because they never happen. There's been some very, very high-intensity, very scary stuff that's been going on very recently that I debated about whether to say publicly or not, and yet it didn't happen. So,
why didn't it happen? Exactly. That's interesting. Okay, let's get to another question. I've got another email. What does David know about the practicality of zero-point energy and other energy generation technology? Could we use it practically and immediately on Earth if it were to be revealed? And that comes in from Dino. Sorry about that, Dino. Okay.
Sure. Okay, bottom line on free energy is this. There is no such thing as a vacuum. Any point that you zoom into in the quantum realm has an incredible amount of energy. In fact, the farther down you zoom in the quantum realm, the closer you are to the center of the universe, because the whole universe is holographic, and there's no actual space. That was only recently discovered. September 2013, these guys, Nima Arkani-Hamed and Yaroslav Trinka, essentially proved there was no Big Bang, and that the whole universe is a holographic blossoming from this single crystalline shape they call the amplituhedron. And I've done like already, 12 episodes of this on wisdomteachings.com on my television show. But the point is, the Big Bang is wrong. The physical matter is not really physical. There is no vacuum. Everything goes back to energy. There's energy everywhere in huge amounts, much more than we need. And there have now been fully 3 different working prototypes and plans for limitless clean energy that have leaked online. There's 2 guys in Brazil. They have some kind of induction system that uses coils. We don't know exactly how to build theirs yet. They've given us some photos of the prototypes. But then there's the guy from Iran, MT Kesh, and he had a threat on his life recently, so he's now leaked the entire file of all of how you build his free energy device. And there's this device called the Quantum Energy Generator, or QEG, in which they now have a working prototype that's in Taiwan that they're already testing. It's leaked from Tesla blueprints. Tesla's patent is actually part of their disclosure package, and that all got leaked online. So it's already out there. It already works. And the main problem with the cabal is that they don't want us to have this because it threatens their geopolitical control. The world is still being run largely by a European-led oligarchy. They have a majority vote in the IMF and the World Bank, so they can determine where the money goes in the world for humanitarian relief programs, and they have a majority vote in the United Nations. So basically they make the rules, and there's a vast international alliance now that's trying to stop that from happening, and that was one of the big things that led to me having a threat on my life in 2011, as we talked about at the beginning, because I was supporting that alliance and releasing some very disparaging material about the cabal. It's inevitable that this is going to happen. Volkswagen is already coming out right now in Europe with cars that get 300 miles to the gallon.
That's right.
There is no way that they could be doing that if they're not using an over-unity system. It's impossible. Gas doesn't burn that well under any normal physics, but yet they've already got the cars out there. It's just not being talked about in the U.S., but if you do the right search, you can totally find write-ups on this. First they had it like 100 miles a gallon, then it went up to 180, and now it's up to 300.
Okay, I'll give you all the free electricity you could ever want right now. You ready? I'm going to disclose it.
Okay.
No, this ain't a
Go
joke. This ain't a joke. And, this is timestamp. So what is today? Today is 4:30, and
Okay.
we're dealing at the time is 9:35 p.m. This is timestamp. Now, check this out. Imagine a mechanical wristwatch, okay? Mechanical that you wind up, right? So you wind up that watch, and what happens? Runs for 24 hours, doesn't it? It's spring. It's a spring in there, spring steel that contains the energy. The spring steel is releasing the energy, okay?
Right. The winding is potential, and as it releases, it becomes kinetic energy.
That is correct. And what happens? The second hand ticks. Time moves forward. The watch is generating its own energy, but you're not winding it. It's sitting on your wrist and still running. You only wind it for 5 or 10 seconds, but then it'll run for 24 hours. Right. Imagine that amplified 1,000 times. So now you have, in essence, a mechanical wristwatch in front of you that is the size of 3-4 feet in diameter. The same idea. And you come home from work, and your house is sitting there, and you just go outside or inside in the garage. You take out a crank, wind up your house in about 10 seconds, and then it's running on electricity. That, in turn, instead of turning a second hand, is now turning another set of gears, so it's unwinding and turning a generator. It's that simple.
Yeah.
That's it. No solar power, no tapping out, no nothing. You just come home. When you park your car in your garage, you get out, you walk over with a crank, you wind up your house, you go inside, and everything is turned on. Doesn't cost anything, and there's no oil, no steam, no solar, no natural gas, nothing involved. In fact, you never pay the man again. Now that, my friends, is free energy. No.
Well, that's do you
understand the concept?
If you extrapolate that to the orbits of galaxies, stars, and planets, then you understand that the universe itself is powered by a mainspring like that, and that energy is available to us through gravity, which we can tap gravity like a water wheel, and the gravity will spin the machine once we understand how to catch gravity on the way down.
Makes sense.
Yep.
And it would be FREE.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
There's so many ways to do it. It's
Yeah, absolutely.
But anybody who does it, it's like you're dead meat. You're lucky if they buy you out.
I was, totally. They don't have to just put you in the ground.
Yeah.
I was thinking about peak oil one day. I was sitting outside of LAX with some friends, and I was looking at all of the planes that were, landing and that were lined up over at LAX. And I just thought, man, you know what? That's an awful lot of wasted metal and aluminum and engines and everything else, because in about 5 or 6 years, it's going to be too expensive or non-existent to even fly those fleets. And we've got to come up with something quick. I'm sure there's something in the works.
I've said this before, but how ridiculous is it that every single flight you go on, you find ashtrays in the bathroom?
Remember?
Right?
Yeah.
Because nobody, and they fix as soon they wait until something breaks before they fix it.
Why?
I flew a major airline recently, and they told us 15 more minutes 3 times in a row because they were fixing a part that broke before we could take off.
Jimmy.
It's because, if you really, really want to get down to it, it's ultimately because the cabal has siphoned as much money as they possibly can out of our economy and diverted all of it to their pet project, which is this full-on breakaway Star Trek space-age civilization that they've been building and building and building. That's really at the core of all of it.
This is how we're going to wind the show down, and I was going to get to this earlier, and now for the next, and thank you for hanging out for a little bit. We didn't plan on I told you, I warned you though, didn't I? Earlier today, I did.
Yes, you did.
Okay, let's jump into MH370, and
Fascinating stuff.
yeah, and so let's go there. I don't want to let MH370 go, even though it appears now that all the major news networks now have moved on. The news cycle
for now they might have. That might change.
Well, let's hope it does. Absolutely, let's hope it does. So let's start at point 1, though. What do you think happened?
Okay. The whole secret to MH370, there's 2 big things that were going on. And you have to understand the way the cabal likes to think is they will try to kill 2 birds or more than 2 birds with 1 stone. I wrote an article of which I've only written the first part, which you probably read, so you're a little front-loaded here.
Mm-hmm.
But it was talking about the disappearance of Flight 370. And what I revealed was that there was a meeting of the top 53 nations. All the leaders of the top nations in the world were meeting in the Netherlands for this nuclear security summit.
Correct.
And there was a flight that was intercepted that was not giving off the right signatures. It didn't have the transponder codes right, and it was trying to fly in, and it was a Boeing 777ER, exactly the same type that was allegedly disappeared over the Indian Ocean now, is where they've pinpointed it to. This ship, this craft was a cargo ship. It wasn't even on its normal trajectory. It was off trajectory from where it's normally listed online, where it should normally be going.
Now, wasn't this over like Denmark?
Yeah, it was Netherlands.
Yeah, right.
The Hague is where everybody was meeting. And
right.
And 2 F-16s actually intercepted this plane as it was coming into the airport. Now, why would 2 F-16s need to meet this plane in the air? Well, because it wasn't actually giving off the right transponder codes. And according to this insider, Preston James, who writes for Veterans Today,
mm-hmm.
it normally would have had a masking technology where you wouldn't have even seen the plane on radar at all. So nobody would have even known that it was coming in. But somehow, perhaps by benevolent extraterrestrial intervention or perhaps by patriotic members of our military, that cloaking system had been deactivated. And then since I wrote that article, I also came across information where the security services all around The Hague for that event, they were all told that they needed to have radio silence. Turn off your radios, don't listen to the radios, and don't use the radios. This is fire, ambulance, police, everybody. And the reason why they were told this was, we don't want to jam the system. We only want the absolutely essential communication to take place. So we don't even want you listening to it, much less actually broadcasting on it.
Okay. Well,
and then the Dutch were saying, this is crazy because we've already tested the system before.
Right.
And we know that it can handle this load no problem. Why would they tell us to turn off the emergency communication system?
Now, where was this time-wise in context to 370's flight?
It was about 10 days later, 12 days later, something like that.
Right.
So you have enough time to land the plane somewhere, repaint it, and then fly it in, and then blame it on your sworn enemy and say that whoever did this is the enemy. And then in my article, I really, really stirred up the pot by going all the way back to Operation Northwoods, which was this document the Joint Chiefs of Staff presented to President Kennedy in 1962, a year before he was assassinated, in which they proposed hijacking airliners and then faking that there was a hijacked airliner and using those to attack American cities where...
Didn't they actually, in Northwoods, which was a frightening document, by the way, didn't they actually mention repainting the plane?
They said that they would repaint the plane, that
Right.
the one that had the passengers on it would be landed at a military base, and then they would launch a drone that would replace the original plane, and the drone could then have enhanced stuff on it that would make the explosion bigger,
Right.
and that way they don't have to kill anybody. And they also proposed that they would use CIA agents on the plane that was landed so that those people would just go back to their normal jobs and nobody would know that those people didn't actually die.
Yeah, Northwoods is a real document, folks.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you can go and do all the research on that, and that is some of the most disturbing reading as an American citizen as you can. Okay, so let's move forward. So, and by the way, one of our listeners here sent me your article, and at the time, I wanted to contact you to see if it was okay to read over the air. And then I ended up, I read maybe a half a page, the intro of it on the air, just because I wanted to introduce everybody where my mind was going. I'm going dark. I'm going dark. I don't want to go dark. I'm serious. I don't want to. I want everything to be, at least answered. But as long as, and we were talking about this earlier, when you get silence, then we fill in the blanks, and it's that simple. And now we are all at that point, and that's why I read, a little bit of yours just to let everybody know I'm not alone. I'm not alone here. So, but yes, so I did read your paper probably the day that you released it or thereabouts. But okay,
yeah,
so
I'll just apologize to my audience and say that I got very caught up in preparing for this New Living Expo I did last weekend, and the fact that I not only am doing probably 6 more episodes of my current show, Wisdom Teachings, but I also am launching a new show, Whistleblower, and I've just been buried in work, so I have not had a chance to finish that article. But the second part that I didn't go into is that there was 20 employees on that flight that work for Freescale Semiconductor. And that is a computer chip manufacturer that used to be a part of Motorola, and every one of those 20 guys has cosmic top-secret security clearance. And Freescale Semiconductor is a company that was bought out and owned by the Carlyle Corporation, which is the same company that owns Booz Allen Hamilton in Hawaii, where Edward Snowden went to get all the NSA documents.
Mm-hmm.
So you put the numbers together, and what you figure out is that Freescale Semiconductor is probably the world's largest manufacturer of computer chips. All iPhones, all smartphones, all laptops, all the routers, all the servers, the backbone of the internet, everything has Freescale chips in it, and everybody at the top level has cosmic clearance. Why do they have cosmic clearance? Because all of those chips have a security backdoor that they can listen to. Those 20 guys were on the way to China for a 1-month intensive meeting, and what I believe, and nobody has confirmed this for me yet, but this is my strong supposition. Those guys were going to hand over the keys to the car to the alliance through the Chinese. It would get into the hands of the Russians, the Indians, the whole alliance that's basically BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, would then have the magic key to be able to use any chip to listen in on any conversation, which includes all the stereo systems in every car made since 2008. It includes the vast majority of all the seats on every airplane. They can listen to your conversation on an airplane. everything, all those little TV screens on the airplane, guess what else it's doing?
Well, if that's the case, I mean, okay, so there's those 20, but that doesn't stop the information highway between the companies and whoever they were taking it to. There's more, there's more people behind them. So was it just to send a message?
This was a move of absolute desperation. I believe that the cabal is, I'm getting lots and lots of dreams this way. And remember, my dream data has been accurate for 21 years I've been doing this. I've had tons and tons of prophecies, and I'm getting an ever-increasing density of prophecies telling me, get ready, you're going to see the cabal literally unravel before your eyes. And I think that the scope of what truth people are going to be exposed to is going to be awesome, and I think that even folks like you and me who are war-weary veterans, we've been out there on the front lines fighting for years, getting bayoneted.
Right.
I think even folks like us who think we've seen and heard everything are going to be totally blown away by all the new stuff that we will learn as this happens that we didn't know before. I've been told that even with all the stuff I've ever leaked that I still barely know anything.
Is it because of the internet? Is that, I mean, that's got to be the majority of what's out of control.
Well,
for
yeah,
them,
I mean,
for them.
People that were exposed, when Northwoods came out, very quietly, very secretly, a military group in the Pentagon started to create a battle plan to defeat the cabal. And it became a very thick binder that was like, 4 or 5 inches thick of documents.
Sure.
Very secret. And we now know that the founding fathers of this alliance to bring down the cabal began planning out the Internet, which started as DARPANET in the 1970s. And from the very, very beginning, they designed the backbone of the Internet so that it could never be compromised and that the free flow of information would occur, because they knew that it was a mathematical inevitability that the cabal would crumble once you have the free distribution of information. It's impossible that they can continue doing business unless they can control the truth.
Well, if that does indeed occur, what happens to the economy, David?
There is already a parallel economy. This is the other big thing that I promised my audience I haven't had a chance to deliver yet, so I want to just go a little bit into this right now.
Okay.
There was a huge and very, very significant meeting that was taking place where they were going to redo the world's financial system. It would be the biggest financial reboot since Bretton Woods after World War II, which is where the dollar became the global reserve currency that all transactions are traded through from one nation to another.
Right.
So if you live in Greece and you want to buy oil from Saudi Arabia, you don't buy it in Saudi money and you don't buy it in Greek money. You exchange Greek money into dollars. You buy your Saudi oil with dollars. That's how you get your oil. So that's very good for the United States because we now have no precious metal or commodity that backs the money, and the Federal Reserve can print as much as they want, and nobody can stop them. So they're creating this massive, massive inflation, which also creates deflation, and it's just ruining the economy. So there has been a plan in place, and it was all voted on and agreed back in 2010, where the economy was supposed to go over to something called SDR, or special drawing rights, which means that each currency is completely reformatted based on a benchmark that is determined by how much that country owns. So if you have coal deposits, you get SDRs for that. If you have gold, you get SDRs for that. Norway has a huge oil fund, so their currency is probably going to do very well in this. But it's not only the land wealth, but it's who owns the title to the wealth of your land on your given country. So the United States has a large land mass, but China has bought up, since we defaulted on them in the 1990s, when they started to really figure out what was happening. China now owns a significant amount of natural resources in America, very quietly. So the cabal, basically the European powers, they have ceased to be a manufacturing base. Most of their profits are coming out of financial instruments, which really just means nothing. And as a result, they're going to really take it badly when this new economy goes into place. Now, it's not bad for the average person. The average person is going to do very, very well. So you have to bear in mind that the people who are going to get hurt the most are people who are, for example, playing around with derivatives where you can hypothecate $1 equals $100. You only hold $1 in the bank, but you can play with $100 and risk it and lose it and not lose anything except your $1, if that. But if you win, it's the equivalent of you having had those $100 to invest.
What do we do with the cabal? Do we put them on trial? Do we take them public and lynch? Do we publicly maim, draw, and quarter in the streets? Or do they silently go away?
I've had a lot of dreams about this, and my perspective is a lot different than most people's. Most people are going to have a witch hunt mentality once this happens, and it is going to happen. Bear in mind.
Right.
It may even be this year. I hope it is. You're going to see this whole thing come apart. When it comes apart, it's very, very important to bear in mind that most of the people in the cabal are compartmentalized. They don't really know what's going on, and they just have a job, and they're trying to feed their family. So it would be a grave mistake for us to start going after everybody in the military, everybody in a corporation, or everybody who has a government job and hold them all equally culpable, as we did basically in the Nuremberg trials, where, you know, if a general said I was just following orders, well, guess what? You're going to the gas chamber.
Yeah, it's not good enough.
Else.
Right.
I don't think that's how we should do this. It really, what the best way to handle this is to take the pattern that was established in the great anti-Masonic rebellion of the 1820s and 1830s in America. The Freemasons put to death this guy who published their rights, and it created a rebellion in which all of the lodges in the North and a significant percentage of them in the South closed, and there was a huge, huge rebellion, a lot of it happening in meetings throughout various boroughs of New York State. And what they did is they published all 33 degrees of Freemasonry. And that's in my book, Financial Tyranny. I actually publish excerpts from this book called Light on Masonry that has the actual transcripts of what you hear in each of these degrees of the Masonry. And those people were Freemasons, but they came forward and they acted as heroes, and they were treated as heroes. So the way I look at it is anybody who's been in the cabal, who was doing something that helped the cabal out, but they were afraid for their lives to speak out, if the time comes and this whole thing breaks apart, and it will, and they want to come forward and they want to do the right thing and try to help out, then they should be treated as heroes and not as co-conspirators.